I'm Deacon John Wilson, Education Enrichment Director for West Angeles. Thought it'd be a good time to give our position on critical race theory. That's seemingly going to be a really possible direction that many school districts are going to go. And they're apparently not getting parental permission to cover it. It reminds me a lot of the changes they made in terms of sex and gender education that are not being run by parents either. And they're taking advantage of the fact that parents are quite busy and not involved. And I thought it'd be a good time from a faith-based program perspective, but also a very reasoning and rational perspective as well, to give our position on critical race theory and what it means. I have a presentation over here that I hope you'll take a look at with me now. Here's what I'm going to cover. Critical race theory, what is it really? A Christian perspective. A week in the life of Peter the Apostle. Some terminology that's important from a faith-based perspective. Actually, very balanced definitions. So I think that people who believe in critical race theory would agree. I run it by a couple of them will agree with these definitions. Racism versus systemic racism. I'll have a lot more to say about that in the next video, probably, when I talk about is America systemically racist, which is a separate discussion that really needs to be had right now. A few definitions, history and origin, what we think about CRT, middle school and high school education in CRT. And then I'm going to talk about I should probably mention that CRT and ethnic studies are becoming a dominant part of freshman university classes. In fact, in some universities, it's become quite controversial and courses have been pulled pending review because Black as well as white students in predominantly white institutions have voiced concern, let's just say it that way, with this, to the point where I think I have to cover this because I think students will be going into that as freshmen and seeing the controversy anyway. And then I'm going to talk about some role models, some Black role models we should be thinking about right now at this time. How about a week in the life of Peter the Apostle? This is all inspired and based on Acts 10. Where we see a centurion, Roman centurion named Cornelius, was led by God to summon Paul. And I'm simplifying the story greatly here to get to the point, but you can read it. It's all in Acts 10. At the time, it was thought by Peter that the truth of Jesus was meant only for the Jews. This is probably prior to a lot of his discussions with Paul that are mentioned in the book of Galatians. I think one other place too in the New Testament. But Peter is coming to some understandings about all of this at the same time, maybe a little before this even. Actually, probably afterwards gets more understanding. A vision from God in a dream comes to Peter. He sees a hoofed animal or hoofed animals coming down from heaven. And in verse 13 to 15, the Lord says to Peter in his dream, rise, Peter, kill and eat. And Peter says, no, I can't do that. Are you kidding? I can't eat foods that are unclean. And then the voice from heaven, God says, what God has cleansed, you must not call common. And that's very important because, it's up to God what's clean and not clean. The question was, is Jesus only for the Jews? And clearly the answer today is he was not. He was for all men. Peter travels to Cornelius, and then Peter has a realization and preaches. In verse 28, he said, I should not call any man common or unclean. He should not presuppose that Gentiles could not receive Jesus Christ and be baptized and come into the Christian church. And I see that, whether you believe it or not, as God saying, hey, you know, a person should not call another person unclean. You should not judge people that way and presuppose, because he didn't know Cornelius. Cornelius has been growing spiritually without him knowing it and coming to know Jesus Christ. That's why he wanted to see Peter. But Peter had assumed that the Romans, I don't know. I don't know. Reminds me of a lot of people in the current woke movement that feel that white people are all the same way. They're all the same. Verse 34, he says, I perceive that God shows no partiality. He's not a respecter of persons, nor should the believer be. We believers should not be impressed by any old doctrine and theory about society or race that does not comport with the will of God. We should not show partiality in our understanding of people and presupposing and prejudging people. It's not of God, and it leads to conflict. There's some new definitions we have to deal with now. This is that quote from Ephesians, that we henceforth be no more children, tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind and doctrine by the sleight of men, cunning craftiness, whereby they lie in wait to deceive us. The concept of the oppressor, also called a supremacist, is really all whites and whites in power, which brings up the subject of whiteness, because then you can say certain characteristics apply to whiteness, being objective and being planning, and things that everybody should do are ascribed to whiteness. Anything with objectivity is whiteness. It reminds me of a lot of Black folks when I was a kid would say, I talk like a white man. Really, I was being taught to speak English, speak clearly. I can change back and forth depending on my audience, though, or I just not even care about it all, like right now. The key is to be communicative. So it's the idea of a supremacist and whiteness and whites in power. Those are all terms that are collectively assembled under the term oppressor. The white is the oppressor race, which presupposes, by the way, that white people are somehow endued with more power and ability to be better than Black people, which is very difficult for me to concede. Equally tough is the idea of oppressed, that BIPOC people of color, are somehow oppressed. Women and LGBT, for that matter, they all intersect on this issue of being oppressed by white males and whiteness and white society, these kind of things. There's not a concept of American society, because American society is white. It feels funny even teaching this. It's so absurd. Anti-racist, terms are being redefined. One who openly opposes the oppressor and his power through policies and practices. It's not enough to say you're not racist, but you have to oppose and do things. And white people, many times in some company trainings, have to say things about themselves, negative things, by the way, and say things positive, whatever positive means, but say negative things also about themselves, but to speak positive truths about their whiteness. These are all things we see that white people are being pressured to do to show they're anti-racist. It's not enough to say, hey, I'm not a racist. That's considered to be racism to say that. For white people to say, we saw this coming, right? When white people were told that if they felt that all lives matter, that was somehow racist. Without depending on knowing that person's story and if they were really racist or not. Reminds me of the Peter thing, what Peter assumed about Cornelius. Systemic racism. America is racist through and through. Blacks cannot succeed with the oppressor in power. Yes, if you think they're racist in society, I do. That's a little different than saying society is systemically racist. Again, I said my next video will cover that. Cancel culture with critical race theory, right? We know about the cancel culture. You got to say things just right, do things just right. You had to have the right background 10, 20, 30 years back, or you'll be canceled. Or if you have an alternate political position, you know, that people don't agree with, or people on the left or liberal don't agree with, then somehow you need to be canceled. Anyone not part of anti-racism, for example, should be canceled. There'll be people that see this video and cancel me. I've gotten threats already on earlier videos I posted. You know, just because someone has a different opinion doesn't mean they should be canceled. The appropriation of Black culture in any way by the white society, there's many Blacks that feel they should be canceled. But I saw a nice series on Netflix that just finished watching called High on the Hog. And it's one thing you come away from in that episode, in that series, I think it's about maybe six episodes. We all are Americans, white and Black. Our food is American. Black food or African food is American food when it's over here. We're all God's children here in America. You should watch High on the Hog. Don't watch it when you're hungry, but you should watch it. It's really good. I mean, white and Black folks should watch it. It's very edifying. It made me feel good as an American and as a Black man after seeing that. First of all, as an American. And I'm sure you'll feel great about it too, no matter what your race and ethnicity is. I loved episode 4 particularly. Now I'm realizing there were 4 episodes, not 6. On 4507 to 4628, especially 4617 to 28. You need to listen to that. You need to look at what she's saying. We're all a part of America. Our food was in every era. Please watch that. And so when you cancel people, you're canceling part of yourself. Since we're all together, we're all God's children. Equity is the equality of outcome, not just the equality of opportunity. We have this thing coming up with the California math framework. Is going to be really different for a different experience if it's implemented. We've seen it implemented in San Francisco a little already. I think it's a form of progressive racism because it makes the assumption that Black children cannot get better at math who don't know math. Just to say children of color. It's decided that even if they're ahead, they need to be slowed down because what they want to do is move algebra to 9th grade. They want to add math classes that involve and are more inclusive and provide more equity for students that are slower in math to have everybody at the same level. And that's, again, people trying to have the outcomes be all the same. Some school districts back in Virginia, I think it's Loudoun County, they want to cut out AP courses and honors courses. And I think that's pathetic, just as a means of helping Black kids to be at the same level as white kids by slowing up what they think is the oppressor. But they don't understand they're also slowing up Black kids that can do math. People of color, Hispanic kids that can do math. So equity is an interesting concept. Its meaning has changed. That's why I listed it here. Equality, I'm all for. But when you get into equity, it doesn't mean what it meant before. It used to mean fairness. And I used to teach about it, but I don't say it anymore because that's a different meaning now altogether that we have to make up somehow for what racist whites have done in the past in the supposition that it's affecting kids today. The history of CRT, it was taught in Ivy League law schools first. in the 70s and the 80s. It's originally called critical theory. It has its roots in Marxism and Black liberation theology. When you say Marxism, you're talking about something that we'll talk about in a minute, that's anti-Christianity, anti-God, atheist. In the Masters of Education programs in the 90s, we find it, even now. It enters government and large corporate culture, 2000 through now. It's really accelerated lately with the production of books on this whole area of critical race theory. And this idea that we have to teach white managers to apologize for their whiteness as a means of advancing people of color. Accelerated in the mid-2020. By the way, it's called critical race theory because it's a theory. It doesn't say it's critical race principles. It accelerated in mid-2020 after the Floyd murder, and colleges began more aggressively adopting it into their curriculum models last semester. And at some schools, it was tossed right back, as I understand it, by whites and blacks in proportion to the blacks on the campus. So it's an issue that's sort of dividing our Black community a little bit. The oppressor versus oppressed sociology, right? It's what we have now. Typically, it's anti-Christian and anti-religion because Christianity is the oppressor's religion. I saw in the run up to this a couple of years ago, a couple of my students graduated from my program, went to college, graduated college, and posted on Facebook or somewhere that Deacon Wilson is part of the oppressor mentality, the whiteness mentality. Why? Because I'm the leader of a program that happens to be in a church. So I'm a part of the white power structure, which is why this origin back in Marxism I have up in the second bullet is so important, because that's where they get that from. There's no love for religion, especially Christianity and Marxism. It's now being introduced to public school classrooms in California, already in San Francisco, from what I hear. Has a lot of fake data to support moving algebra out of 8th grade and into 9th grade and claiming that more students are doing better with it. But that's a different subject altogether. It's getting ready to come to Southern California, already in a couple of private schools here in the Los Angeles area. Parents, I need you to get vigilant. I need you to go to your PTO meetings. I need you to look at your students' work. I know they just were on Zoom. And you probably got tired of watching with them what they were doing, but get involved in how they're learning history and English and math, and see those lessons. Here's some, I'll close with some important Black role models. I had about 6 or 7 others, but I'll just deal with these right now. Martin Luther King, he is now under attack by critical race theorists. He's a founding father of the United States, I consider him. The Constitution did what it did. It created the country. The Civil War did what it did. It fought to keep the country together. And it did, quote, end slavery. But of course, we had Jim Crow after the American armies left the South in 1876. And we get that. But Martin Luther King's under attack, and he's a founding father. He's the one that said, behold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Those words are found in the Declaration of Independence. So the things he does, why I consider him a founding father and also one of the 20 most important Americans, is he brings us back to unifying. I believe that's why he has a holiday, by the way. He brings us back to unifying the Declaration of Independence with the Constitution. You know, when you go back and read Adams and Jefferson's letters, they knew there'd be a civil war. They knew they did not address this issue in order to keep the country together. They knew it could be a problem. They weren't happy with slavery. Martin Luther King comes along and puts it all together. He's a great American, despite any flaws he had personally. Under great duress, he said, behold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Hallelujah. We know that also he wanted a time where character was judged and not, and we're judged by our character, I should say, and not by skin color. But so much of critical race theory is just that. Everything is based on the color of your skin. And now he's under attack, no surprise. In fact, a couple of his statues were pulled in that frenzy last summer. And it's sad. The other one who's under attack is Frederick Douglass. He's important in the establishment of Black civil rights and women's rights too. He was a women's rights advocate when he died, him and his second wife. Also under attack as a representative of a system that failed. Statues were pulled and his homes in New York and DC were attacked again during that frenzy during the summer. He's attacked also. I think he's a kind of a founding father. You know, he was a close advisor to Abraham Lincoln, another great American. These are two great role models historically. I also love Frederick Douglass because he proved he was a self-taught man and he proved that you could teach yourself. But that's not the whole story. So I hope you understand from what I've covered today, what we as a program believe about critical race theory. And I can commit to you today that we will not be teaching any of our classes under a framework of critical race theory, nor will students be told that white folks are the oppressors and their students are oppressed. And we won't teach about whiteness, these positive so-called images that are assigned to whiteness and that they're considered to be oppressor mentalities that Black people should not adopt, which is ridiculous. God bless you all. Hope that helped. We'll talk to you really soon. Bye-bye now.